All right, learner, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at Hero Path, Dragon Roar, a fantasy RPG board game. It seems like it's getting a lot of attention these days. We're going over game descriptions, character creation, combat tips, FAQs, the whole nine yards. By the end of this deep dive, you'll know if Hero Path Dragon Roar is worth adding to your shelves.
Right off the bat, what's interesting is the way this game blends classic RPG with strategic board game mechanics. It's not just, roll the dice and see what happens. It's about making choices that actually affect the story.
Yeah. Speaking of the story, the game descriptions really paint a picture, don't they? Emerald dragons soaring over snow-capped mountains, enchanted forests, creatures around every bend. It sounds incredible. I don't know about you, but that kind of world building really gets me excited about a game. What about you?
Absolutely. A vibrant setting really pulls you in. But it can't just be window dressing. The world needs to have an impact on gameplay. And it sounds like Hero Path Dragon Roar does just that.
It seems like it. Yeah. The sources talk about a core gameplay loop of exploration, character growth, resource management, and facing epic challenges. All pretty standard RPG stuff. But with a board game twist, you're trekking through this amazing world, leveling up your character, managing your supplies, and then bam! You've stumbled upon a dragon's lair.
And that's where the strategic decision-making kicks in. Do you charge in? Try to sneak past? Do you need to go back and prepare? It's these choices that make the game compelling.
For sure. Okay, let's talk about creating your legend. One of the sources mentioned a giant hero option, which I gotta say sounds pretty awesome. What other kinds of heroes can we create? And what makes character creation in this game unique?
Well, the giant hero is just a taste of the variety you'll find. What's really cool is the customization. You combine ability cards, arms cards, market cards, even these things called hero gems. It all comes together to craft your ideal hero.
So it's not just like picking a class and sticking with it. Nope, not at all. There's tons of room for experimentation. You can really tailor your character to your preferred play style. You want to be a nimble rogue relying on speed and cunning. You can do that. Prefer a mighty warrior charging into battle. Go for it. It's about finding the build that suits you.
I can already see myself spending hours tinkering with different combinations trying to create the ultimate hero. But eventually those heroes have to face some challenges, right? And speaking of challenges, let's talk about combat. The sources mention action points, action cues, and dice rolling. Is this where those strategic board game elements really come into play?
Absolutely. Combat seems to be designed for players who like tactical depth. You're not just rolling dice and hoping for the best. It's about planning your moves, considering your character's strengths and weaknesses, and reacting to what your opponent does.
So how does it work? These action points, action cues, how do they actually function? And what about character stats? Okay, so imagine you have a certain number of action points to spend each turn. You use these points for actions like moving, attacking, or using special abilities. The action cue determines the order those actions happen. It adds strategy because you have to anticipate your opponent's moves, plan accordingly.
So it's like a chess match, but with swords and sorcery.
Yeah, exactly. Think several steps ahead, consider consequences, and adapt your strategy on the fly. And the character stats, they're crucial in all of this.
Right. The sources mention strength, constitution, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do those stats affect combat? Like, give me an example.
Okay. Let's say you have a character with high strength but low constitution. They hit hard, but they can't take a lot of damage. On the other hand, a high constitution character might be able to withstand a lot of punishment, but they might not deal as much damage.
So it's not just about having the strongest character. It's about building a balanced team that can cover each other's weaknesses.
Exactly. Solo game, you adapt to your character's limits. Multiplayer. That's when team composition and synergy become crucial. You need a team that can work together, combine their strengths, cover each other's weaknesses.
Teamwork. I like it. But let's step off the battlefield for a minute. Talk about the world itself. We've got expansive environments, magical creatures. What else about the world of Hero Path, Dragon Roar, stands out to you?
Well, the sources mention this thing called the place site board, and that's where things get interesting. You're not playing on the same map every time. Each game, the board changes, offering different challenges and treasures. You're always discovering something new.
Wait, hold on. The board changes every time you play. That's pretty amazing. I can see how that adds a lot of replayability. You're not just going through the motions, you're constantly adapting.
Precisely. That keeps exploration from just being moving from point A to point B. It becomes a key part of the strategy. You might adjust your route, rethink resources, even your team, based on the challenges of the board.
All right, now we're talking. That's the kind of depth I like to see in a game.
But no fantasy RPG is complete without, fearsome foes. And it looks like Hero Path, Dragon Roar delivers on that. We've got enemy tokens, leech tokens. It all sounds a little ominous.
It does, doesn't it? The sources don't give us the full breakdown of the mechanics, but these tokens definitely add complexity to enemy encounters.
Okay, so give me an example. I'm facing a creature with a leech token. What does that mean for me?
Imagine you're fighting this creature, and not only do you have to worry about its attacks, but it's also draining your health with every hit. Suddenly, healing potions become a lot more important. You need to prioritize healing or risk being overwhelmed. And with 10 different types of enemy tokens, you'll need to adapt your strategies.
So it's not just about brute force. You need to be aware of those extra effects and plan accordingly. I like it. It adds another layer of strategy to the combat. And speaking of enemies, we talked about those creatures from mythology, like the Joragumo, the Spider Bride, and the Gashadokuro, the giant skeleton. Were there any others that stood out to you? Oh, definitely. There was the Penanggalan, that Malaysian vampire that detaches its head, flies around with its entrails dangling below. Definitely a memorable one. And then there's the Lamashtu Mesopotamian goddess, all about chaos and misfortune.
Wow, those sound intense. But pulling from these different mythologies, it just makes the game's world that much richer. It's not just generic fantasy creatures.
Oh.
These are beings rooted in real-world legends.
Absolutely. It adds authenticity and depth. You can tell the developers put thought into choosing creatures that are both fascinating and fit thematically.
Okay, so we've got diverse enemies, each with their own quirks and challenges. But then there are the boss battles, the ultimate tests, and at the top, the mighty dragons. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love a good dragon battle?
Dragons. They hold a special place in our imagination, don't they? Powerful ancient beings, guardians of treasure, the ultimate test for a hero. And in Hero Path, Dragon Roar, they seem to be all that and more.
Yeah. And we know they're not just mindless beasts. The way you get Grail's roar, that powerful incantation, suggests some intelligent strategy involved.
Yeah.
You can't just charge in. You have to plan weaken Grail by defeating her guardians. And then the final showdown.
It's that classic hero's journey, facing greater and greater challenges, emerging stronger, more capable. And the rewards, as we said, are significant. Not just the roar itself, but also runes and dragon hearts. I'm guessing those have their own uses in the game, adding another layer to the strategic choices you make.
This is making me want to grab some friends and dive into this world right now.
Right.
But before we get carried away with hypothetical adventures, let's take a step back. We've talked mechanics creatures. What about the overall experience? What are your initial thoughts on the game's potential?
From what we've seen, Hero Path, Dragon Roar has the potential to be really captivating, blending RPG depth with strategic board game mechanics in a fresh and exciting way. And the world inspired by mythology filled with those fascinating creatures, it really draws you in.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I think we've only just started. There's so much more to uncover.
Tell you what, let's take a quick pause here.
Yeah.
Gather our thoughts and then come back for part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And while we're taking a break, why don't you, dear listener, think about what we've discussed? What stands out to you? What questions do you have? We'll tackle as many as we can when we get back for part 2.
Stay tuned, learners. The adventure continues. All right, back again for more on Hero Path, Dragon Roar.
We left off talking about those boss battles and those awesome creatures from mythology. I'm ready to dive a little deeper into what makes this game tick.
Excellent. We were just discussing those enemy and leech tokens, and I think there's more to unpack about how they affect the gameplay, like how those leech tokens actually work during combat. What do they do?
Yeah, you mentioned they drain health. But how does that actually happen? Is it action points, hit points, gold? What are they taking?
From what I'm seeing, it looks like leech tokens drain hit points. So every time a creature with a nooch token hits you, you're losing hit points. Yeah. Not just from the attack, but also from that join effect. It makes those encounters a lot more dangerous.
Yeah. Suddenly, healing potions aren't just an option, they're a necessity. You can't just go all-out offense. You need a good defense, too. What about those enemy tokens? We know there are 10 types, so we can assume that means a lot of variety in the creatures. What kind of unique abilities might we see?
Well, the sources aren't too specific, but think about creatures that poison you damage over time, or maybe they stun you so you can't take actions, or even creatures that can buff their allies, making them tougher to beat. The possibilities are pretty wide open.
It sounds like you can't just use the same strategy for every fight. You got to adapt to the creatures you're facing.
Yeah.
Keeps you on your toes.
Well,
it's like know thy enemy and all that.
Exactly. You got to understand what they can do, their strengths, their weaknesses, how they affect your team. That's part of what makes the combat so engaging. You're not just attacking, you're thinking, adapting, strategizing.
And speaking of adapting, remember we were talking about that play site board, how it changes every game. I wonder, how do you think that affects combat encounters?
That's a great point. You have to consider the terrain, the environment. Maybe you're fighting on a narrow bridge so your movement is limited, Or maybe it's a dense forest giving cover to ranged attackers. The environment becomes part of the strategy.
It's not just a background. It's something you have to think about, use to your advantage, try to outmaneuver your opponents. That adds a whole other level to the combat, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Keeps things fresh and unpredictable, too. You can't just memorize tactics. You got to be flexible,
Yeah.
adapt to the board, the enemies. It's all part of the challenge.
Okay, before we move on, I got to ask, any other mythical creatures that stood out to you when you were going through the sources?
Oh, yeah, tons. One that caught my eye was the Nuckelavee. It's from Orcadian folklore. This horrifying horse-like demon, no skin, just raw muscle and sinews.
Okay, that is definitely nightmare fuel. But it's cool that they're drawing from these lesser-known mythologies, not just the usual suspects.
Yeah.
You're encountering creatures you've probably never even heard of.
That's right. Makes you want to learn more about them, where they come from. It's like the game is a doorway to this whole world of mythology and folklore.
I know. Like, I'd never heard of the Nuckelavee before, but now I'm totally going to look it up. Okay, so combat creatures, we've covered those. But what about the other parts of the game? There are mentions of food units, gold coins, all these different cards. How did those things factor into the gameplay?
It seems like they're tied to resource management, which is a big part of RPGs and board games. Think of food units as your hero's sustenance. They gotta eat to stay alive. Keep adventuring.
Makes sense. And gold coins. Probably for buying stuff.
You got it. Items upgrades, maybe even services from NPCs you meet along the way.
So it's not just about, killing monsters and looting.
Yeah.
You got to be smart with your gold, too.
Exactly. And that's where the cards come in. Some cards might be powerful equipment upgrades, others might give you special abilities, or even influence the game's story in unexpected ways.
Wait, cards that influence the story. What does that even mean?
Imagine you draw a card, and it lets you form an alliance with a powerful faction. Or maybe it reveals a hidden path to some secret treasure. These cards can throw in twists and turns, make each playthrough unique.
That's really cool. It's not just a straight line. You're making choices that can change the story, open up new possibilities. I like that. It keeps things fresh even after multiple playthroughs. But managing all these resources, the strategic choices, it seems like it could get overwhelming, especially for new players.
It's a valid concern, but it seems like the game is designed to be both accessible and deep. The basic rules are simple enough, but there's a lot of room to master the strategy as you play more, experiment with different builds, different approaches.
So there's a learning curve,
Yeah.
but it's not so steep that it scares people off.
Right. It's about discovery and progression. Start with the basics, and as you gain experience, you unlock more complex stuff.
And that feeling of progression is so rewarding. You're always learning, getting better, overcoming bigger challenges. It's a good feeling.
Okay, so we've talked about combat creatures' resource management. What about team dynamics? The game has solo play, but it looks like it really shines in multiplayer. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. The sources really emphasize teamwork and synergy, especially for the tougher challenges, like boss battles. You can't just have one superpowered character to carry everyone. You need a well-rounded group, each member bringing their own strengths to the table.
So like building a classic RPG party, you got your tank, your healer, your damage dealer, the whole crew.
Exactly. And in Hero Path, Dragon Roar, it seems like team composition is even more important.
Yeah.
Because of that dynamic place site board and the different enemies, one encounter might need a team of melee fighters. Another might need more ranged attacks. You're always adjusting.
So you got to think about who's on your team. Make sure you have the right mix of skills for the job. It's like putting a puzzle together, but with heroes. That's a great analogy. And don't forget those cards and abilities. That adds another dimension to team building. You can fine-tune your party, create a real force to be reckoned with.
This is making me even more excited about this game. I can already picture all the different team combinations, the strategies, but there's one thing we haven't really talked about, and that's the overall theme, the message of the game. Is there something deeper going on beneath all the action and adventure?
That's a good question. The sources don't come right out and say it, but there are definitely hints. The emphasis on character growth, overcoming challenges, working together. It all suggests a narrative about resilience, collaboration, pursuing a common goal.
So it's not just about winning, it's about the journey, the connections you make along the way.
Precisely. And drawing inspiration from real-world mythology that adds another layer. Themes of heroism, sacrifice, good versus evil, it's all there.
Yeah, it's like those classic myths and legends. They're not just stories. They reflect our own experiences, right? Our struggles, our victories, our potential for both good and bad.
You're absolutely right. And I think Hero Path Dragon Roar captures that in a way that feels both familiar and new. It's a game that embraces storytelling and those classic archetypes we all know.
Okay, I think it's time for another break. We've covered a lot, but we're not done yet. When we come back for the final part, we'll dig into those mythical powers like Grail's Roar, see how they change the game. We'll also talk about some advanced combat strategies and give our final thoughts on what makes this game so special.
Can't wait. And while we're gone, dear listener, think about this. What kind of hero would you create in this world? What challenges would you face? What kind of legacy would you leave behind in Hero Path Dragonroar? We'll be back soon to finish our adventure.
All right, learners, we're back, and we're in the home stretch of our deep dive into Hero Path Dragonroar. I'm getting that feeling, like right before a boss battle. That mix of nerves and excitement. Are you feeling it?
Definitely. We've journeyed through the world, analyzed mechanics, faced some pretty tough enemies. Now it's time to uncover what really sets this game apart.
And for me, a big part of that is those mythical powers. We talked about Grail's Roar, which sounds amazing. But are there other examples of these game-changing abilities that players can get?
The sources don't give us a complete list, but they do hint that Grail's Roar is just the beginning. Imagine wielding elemental magic, summoning spectral allies, or even manipulating time. The possibilities are pretty incredible.
Time manipulation.
Oh.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's something I got to hear more about. How do you think those kinds of powers could change the whole game?
It's all about giving players choices. You're not just following a set path. You're making decisions that shape your hero and how you experience the game. Do you go for raw power, resilience, or maybe those support skills that help your team?
So it's not just about picking the coolest power. It's about choosing the abilities that fit you and your team. I can see how that adds a whole other level of strategy. Like, do I want to be the time-bending mage or the summoner with a spirit army? It's a tough choice.
Exactly. And it looks like these abilities are tied to challenges and quests. You have to earn them, prove yourself. It's not just handed to you.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm already brainstorming my dream character. But, for someone who's brand new to Hero Path, Dragonroar, all this talk of mythical powers and strategy could be a little overwhelming.
Oh.
What advice would you give to a first-time player?
I'd say don't be afraid to try things out. Experiment with different builds, different strategies, see what clicks for you. There's no one right way to play, and that's part of the fun.
It's a game that rewards you for being curious, for trying new things. You're not just reading rules, you're discovering your own path to victory. I like that. It's not about following a formula. It's about finding creative solutions, making your own legend.
Exactly. And I'd also say remember the importance of teamwork. Whether you're playing with friends or online collaboration is key. Communicate, coordinate, support each other. That's how you succeed.
It's like that classic RPG idea, together we're stronger. And it seems especially true in Hero Path Dragonroar, with those epic challenges and mythical creatures. Thinking about everything we've discussed, it's clear that Hero Path Dragonroar is more than just a game. It's an experience.
I agree. It's a world you can lose yourself in a story. You help create a legend you can build. That's what makes it so compelling. It's not just about winning or losing. It's about immersing yourself, making your mark on this incredible world.
Yeah, that feeling of being part of something bigger. It's powerful.
Yeah.
Like you're stepping into those myths and legends, becoming part of them. I think that's what keeps players coming back.
For sure. It's the desire to explore, to discover, to see what other stories this world has to tell. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
I think so too. So as we close out this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with this. Imagine yourself stepping into the world of Hero Path, Dragonroar. What kind of hero would you be? What legendary challenges would you face? What mark would you leave on this mythical realm? It's something to think about.
The answers, my friend, are inside you. And that's the magic of a game like this. It's an invitation to explore, to create, to discover, to become the hero of your own story.
And that, learners, is an adventure worth having. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Hero Path Dragonroar.